Okay, welcome to Management Consulting for Engineers. This is an overview of the course. Now it'll probably be in two parts. So in the 10-minute mini overview, I provided an insight into the various modules of the course. In this particular video, I'm actually going to go through each module and give you more depth of what we'll cover over the next depending if it could be the 10-day version, could be the 13-week version, or it could be the online. But over the next period, we're going to do we're going to look at each of the modules. So I went through this basically in the previous video, so I won't go through it again, but it just tells you that there are 12 modules, and there's a final one on your project presentation. And each of the modules is around these major themes. So management consulting in context, management consulting process itself, the stages of when you actually engage with clients, and then the various areas of consulting, the functions, and then your skills that you need for success as consultants. So the learning objectives of the whole course, so this focus really on the whole course. A context definition of the history, understand the marketplace, what are the skills and roles of a management consultant, and also the professional designation, CMC, Certified Management Consultant, what does it take to become that? And again, an overview of the consulting process and the life cycle, the stages and the life cycle. Life cycle meaning you could have a long-term relationship with a client, and you could go through 100 projects that have beginning and an end and take a few months out, another project, and that could go on 14, 20, 25 years if you have a strong relationship with a company and a client, as you build and help them scale their businesses. So the life cycle really doesn't just look at the life cycle of a project, but it looks at also the life cycle of a relationship. And understand the basics of approaching assignments, analyzing and synthesizing, concluding and recommending, how you actually do the work. And also, it doesn't say it on this slide, but also how to manage your career in consulting. So there are 4 course books. It might become 5, but these 4, I know them well. And the fundamental foundational book in consulting is this one here by Milan Kuber, Management Consulting, A Guide to the Profession. And this one is the International Labour Office out of Geneva. This was the book, and there's many, many editions. When I got my Certified Management Consulting qualification, this was the fundamental Bible, the book which packaged management consulting in all aspects of it. So that's going to be one of our core readings. And similar, this was another one. This was Consulting to Management, Larry Grainer and Metzler, Metzler. So he was a joint author of this book, Consulting to Management, and they were practitioners. And one of them, I think it's Metzler, has since passed away quite a while ago, actually. But again, that book is a classic. So I've used these classics. And then How to Make It Big as a Consultant, William Cohen, PhD. These are more, we'll call them formal academic type books. These are more books that you would buy at the airport, but they're very, very interesting. They provide a lot of personal insight from these individuals, particularly this one, Peter Block, Flawless Consulting, A Guide to Getting Your Expertise Use. So it's more the inside story of the practice of management consulting from successful people who have practiced it, where these 2 are more the fundamental, we'll call them academic formal books. There are many other books. There's tons of them out there, and these are just some. This one I read. This was back in 2007, 2008. The world's newest profession. You all know the world's oldest profession. So it's management consulting in the 20th century. So it would be nice to have another one. This is about 2007. So it's a reflection of management consulting over the past 100 years at that time. So it'd be good to see what's happening in the 21st century, and that's the kind of theme that I want to make the course from a project point of view. So we will use that as a foundation book, and I'll provide readings from that. This is another one, Management Consulting, Delivering an Effective Project, Wickham and Wilcock, Getting Started in Management Consulting Applied to the Industry. This is a good one, The Trusted Advisor. This is by an English professor, a professor from the UK. I think he's from Harvard or one of those schools, David Meister. He just retired recently. Well, his trusted advisor isn't just for management consultants, it's for lawyers and accountants as well. Anyone that is in a professional practice delivering professional services to the public, that's insights from him. He just specialized in professional industries. Okay, so let's continue. The paradigm shift. I want you to know that I'm going to create a special presentation, a special module for this course. It's not one of the main modules, it will be part of Module 0, but it's going to be a module or a sub-module of Module 0 on the transition from engineer to manager to management consultant, because it is a big transition. My advice is if you're a graduate engineer, is you get a few years engineering experience onto your belt, maybe a little bit of supervisory experience if you can, and management, maybe if you can, a bit of marketing experience before you go into management consulting. If you went straight from an engineering degree, did an MBA, straight into consulting, in my opinion, you'll be disadvantaged as you progress in your career. It doesn't mean to say you won't be successful, but you'll have disadvantages because you never really bit into the apple of engineering practice, because in it teaches all kinds of systematic, disciplined thinking, or using your rigorous education in an applied, practical way is something that is a great foundation to use in management consulting. So I provided some links here. You will get this presentation, so there's links. The Wall Street Forum Engineers to Consulting, Should I Bother? Paradigm Shift from Engineering to Management Consulting, and so on. So there is a whole study around this that engineers ought to avail themselves of, because they are different practices of that. There's no doubt, no doubt. Okay. Oops. Yep, it's clicking it. Sorry. Well, just as a matter of interest, while I have you, just let's look. Engineering to consulting, should I bother? So these are some links, and there's a lot of personal notes from people. So it's something that you can look up. All right, now, another course I teach, APS 1013, Applying Innovation, is really, in many ways, practicing consulting in industry without having the actual knowledge of what management consulting is. So, I teach a number of courses. So content course would be the operations management. So you actually understand how manufacturing and operations management works. Then I have an aerospace course where you're using operational management and innovation management techniques to actually solve problems. Same with APS 1013. You're actually in industry solving problems, but you really don't know anything about the management consulting profession. You really are just I'm coaching you as you go along, so you're sort of way, each week is a new challenge that I help you work through. But this course is actually preparing you. If you take those course APS 1012, Management of Innovation and Applying Innovation, or the one in the aerospace industry, or operations management, this actually shows you how you can actually use that stuff as a professional practitioner in the consulting industry. So this course, APS 1013, actually gives you practical hands-on skills and gives you experiential learning of what you would actually do if you were engaging with a company. But it actually doesn't teach you how you do it and why you do it, etc. You just jump in there and get it done, and gives you a bit of exposure to the consulting stages and so on. And helps you develop some competencies you can actually use, problem solving, emotional intelligence, conflict resolution, decision making. So you learn all those sort of hardcore, soft skills, but they're hardcore skills required for consulting practitioners. So let's look at module 1. So we're going to go through each of the modules now. So this video will probably go to module 6, and then we'll take a break and do the rest in part 2. So overview of consulting, how you design your own firm. This is really what we talk about in Mod 1. Talk about proposals, and work client teams, demonstrating functional and content knowledge. We'll talk about the dark sides of consulting, stress, manipulation, Enron, illegal scandals, etc., WorldCom, We'll talk about consulting companies, the big strategy companies, the big four, KPMG, Deloitte, Pricewaterhouse, and who's the fourth one? Whatever, it'll come up. Management expectations and delivery, how you manage expectations. This is one of the most important skill sets for consultants. And moving up or moving out in management consulting companies. This is the what we'll cover over the overall course. So give me a bit of history. So from 1890 to 1940, it was technical work, mainly driven by industrial engineering, and they were called management engineers. And the companies around them was Arthur D. Little, A.D. Little, Booz, Allen Hamilton, and A.T. Kearney. These were companies really came out of the engineering fraternity, the industrial engineering, the management engineering fraternity, not mechanical engineering or electrical, but more the rise of industrial and management engineering, which really grew out of the United States' mass production process, out of the Ford Motor Company, etc. And then from 1940 to 70, strategic management, as a result, during the war, the Second World War, it was a rise of strategic thinking. You know, how do we invade Germany? Which way should we plan our troop movements? What is the infrastructure we require to support this invasion? You know, what is our industrial infrastructure? Don't forget the United States, when they entered the war, I think it was 1942, Britain was pretty exhausted at that time. Germany had all of Europe, and the United States had to mobilize hundreds of thousands of men, and so it finally happened that the women actually went into industry. This was a massive transformation, and they actually turned automotive companies into airplane companies, fighter aircraft companies. And that rose with this whole concept, this bigger picture thinking of strategic management. So companies like McKinsey, Bain & Company, and Boston Consulting Company were born. From the 70s till the 90s, it was technical and financial specialisms. I kicked in around about 1988, 1990. And my technical specialty at that time was advanced manufacturing systems, specifically ERP, MRP to ERP, and I had CAD/CAM, computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing. That was leading edge stuff. That was unusual for an engineer, you know, to master the IT systems applied to management. And plus I had the engineering side as well. So technical, many previous consultants were MBA types, which is basically a general management degree. It doesn't have any technical pedigree, really. Some of them might have, but most of it was sort of these general manager types coming out of elite schools, the Harvards and so on. But the rise of the industry realized that as IT systems rose, that they needed detailed expertise at how business processes work. So how do you structure a bill of material? How do you do your phases and milestones of your product development process? Well, that stuff's not taught in MBA schools, or it wasn't. There are operational management options now that it's risen in the past 20 years. But back in the 1980s and 90s, that was a rising field, an emerging field. And there was, you know, Arthur Andersen. Now these names, Ernst & Young, KPMG, didn't exist. So KPMG, for example, in Canada, we were called Thorne Stevenson and Kellogg. Completely separate company and had a long history in strategic management. And would have been up there with McKinsey's and so on in Canada. But it then merged with an accounting firm called Ernst & Whinney. So it became Stevenson, Kellogg, Ernst & Whinney in about 1987 or so. And then it then merged again with Pete Marwick. They were American, but they were also born, I think, in Western Europe, Belgium or somewhere. And Pete Marwick became Pete Marwick, Stevenson, and Kellogg. So the Ernst & Whinney was dropped. So for example, I worked with Ernst & Whinney International in the United States for McDonnell Douglas. So I was an Ernst & Whinney consultant, but I was an employee of Stevenson Kellogg, Ernst & Whinney in Canada. And then after the merger with Pete Marwick, Canada became Pete Marwick, Stevenson and Kellogg, and then finally KPMG. And Arthur Young in the United States merged with Ernst & Whinney and became Ernst & Young. And Arthur Young's counterpart in Canada was Woods Gordon, and it became Ernst & Young. So there's a history here of mergers in different countries, and you could say it was a mess, but I mean, out of that mess came a lot of order as different practices merged or acquired others. And there was an Arthur Anderson became Anderson Consulting. So the Anderson was, and then Anderson Consulting became Accenture because of scandal with companies like Enron. Their practice was, their practice wasn't destroyed, but the name was destroyed, and it re-emerged then as Accenture. But was the rise of these big firms, that's the bottom line. And then between 1990 and 2018, niche firms, outsourcing of e-business. So for example, IT systems like ERP systems were completely outsourced. So for example, Lockheed Martin and British Aerospace, BAE Systems, outsourced their whole IT departments to a company called CSC, Computer Sciences Corporation, out of the United States. CSC itself grew out of the defense industries, supporting the defense industries for IT systems. So CSC was an IT systems integration firm. It's still a big going concern. I had about 4 or 5 years strategic relationship with CSC for aerospace and defense companies, well, specifically defense aerospace companies. A very wonderful time for me, and long-term friends emerged out of it. And I'll talk about that as we go through the course. But once again, it's a complex business, and one of the things you'll find is that you can create yourself a niche, make your own, but you have to, when you're a niche company, you've got to be niche at a world-class level. So for example, if you want to get hired by global firms, you know, in various sectors, you gotta have a global presence and a global niche. So you have to be the best of the best, there's no doubt, or they're not going to hire you at these very senior levels of management consulting. So big players' recovery from 2000 to 2003 after the dot-com bust, the corruption and accountability, Sarbanes-Oxley emerged. This was a result of Enron. Diversification, mergers and acquisitions became a big industry. One of the big mergers, big merger that really was an acquisition, but a merger between Chrysler and Mercedes-Benz, or became Daimler-Chrysler, Daimler-Benz and Chrysler, was a merger, but it was really an acquisition by Daimler over Chrysler, and it failed. Well, why did it fail? Well, it was all mainly cultural issues. Well, what were the consultants doing there to help foster this relationship? I don't know, but that would be something you'd want to look at. I know why it failed, I know the whole case, but I don't know what the role of management consultants were, if any. My experience is German companies tended not to use management consultants. They tend to be driven and run by engineers. And they didn't look too favorably, at least come back 20 years ago, upon, for example, the MBA type education. Germans respected more the hard scientific-based education, such as an engineering degree. Of course, when the SAP company has risen, enormous ERP company, that then may have changed the attitude toward the professional management practice. But Daimler-Chrysler was an enormous failure of what was perceived as a merger, but was really an acquisition. It was sold as a merger. The image of MBAs has not been good in recent years. You're getting $100,000 for an MBA degree, but what are you really learning? There's a lot of question marks against MBAs. You just have to put the MBA controversy on and Google it, and you'll see all kinds of stuff coming up. But though, as a result of that, though, MBA schools are now trying to be much more relevant to industry practices and needs, and probably hiring more professors who have actually practical experience and not just research experience. The whole concept of upselling, consultants tend to want to upsell. So once you get a job done, the next job is to try to prolong your time there. So you do work, let's say, in the manufacturing department, and then you try to sell it across the whole business, or try to upsell more work. E-business, what's been the impact of e-business on the management consulting profession? You know, it's basically the rise of business process management as a major field. Emerging markets, and etc. as various projects. Competition. proven track record, skeptical clients. You know, it's not easy being a consultant because there's so many scandals have happened and there's so many unqualified consultants go into companies and then make a mess. You just, again, Google all the consulting projects that have failed. I think there's scandals that are coming out from the UK National Health Service all the time, and the Canadian federal government, and not to mention the US as well. There's all kinds of scandals where hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent and they're not getting value for money. Why is this? Well, you would want to look at the actual skill sets of the people that they're hiring. Are they really professionally certified management consultants? In fact, you'll find most are not. And the increased need for deep expertise. So it used to be these guys could go in strategy, you know, look well and talk well, maybe motivational speaker types calling themselves management consultants. No deep expertise, like they don't know how an aircraft is designed. They don't know how an aircraft is built, how a car is designed, how a machine tool. So in manufacturing, for example, it's a very complex industry with very complex processes, a lot of technical knowledge. If you're going to be a consultant in that area, you need to have a knowledge of those business processes, or you're going to come across as shallow. And sophisticated clients know that nowadays. You can't give them a snow job or pull the wool over their head. These are some of the biggest management consulting firms. Again, we'll talk about this more in Module 1. Either Capgemini, Accenture, CSC, and these are the functions. I won't read all these, Booz Allen. So we'll talk about that in Module 1. This is the industry market segmentation. So you've got telecommunications, finance, utilities, aerospace. There's many other industries. These are only some. Healthcare, fast manufactured consumer goods. I've actually worked in the media, with the Globe and Mail. I've worked in aerospace, a lot of aerospace and defense, and a lot of manufacturing, and in fast manufactured goods in both food and with newspapers. But no retail, no oil and gas, transportation. Transportation here really means the railway system, the airline system, not the making of the trains for the railway, that's manufacturing, not the making of the aircraft for flight and for aviation, that's aerospace engineering and manufacturing. So transportation is really the use of those products. And again, there's massive expertise that one can have in those. You have to understand how they work, the industries. So infrastructure in a city, you'd have to probably be, before you went into management consultant, perhaps an urban planner or you know, a civil engineer that specializes in infrastructure projects. That would arm you with the ability to go into management consulting in that field. And then these are the strategy, the functions, strategy, operations, advanced manufacturing systems, finance. From a sector point of view, you have not-for-profit. Some consultants specialize in charities, and others in the public sector and in the private. Private meaning companies that are like family-owned business or companies that are privately held. They're not sold on the stock market. So the public sector is both the government sector, but also companies that are publicly traded. So again, goes into more depth here. Here are some of the companies involved in strategy, levers to implementation, high-level goals, long-term plans, visioning, directional planning, operations, re-engineering, supply chain management. And these are the companies. There's Boston Consulting, McKinsey for strategy. Now, KPMG, Deloitte and Touche, all those companies do strategy as well. But they might do strategy as an operational improvement as opposed to strategy as to where the company will be in 10 years or should the company get rid of some of its divisions. These companies tend to focus on that. From an operational point of view, KPMG, Pricewaterhouse, Capgemini, they tend to specialize in getting inside companies or work looking at their whole supply chain and transforming those. And then you have the IT. So this is large-scale IT systems implementation. CSC was massive in the defense industry, but so was Accenture and IBM. They were outsourcing ERP, enterprise resource planning systems, for the defense sector. Human resource management, again, is a specialty. So there are firms like Mercer specialize in compensation and benefits. So they're going to tell you what salaries that CEOs should be paid or what middle managers should be paid, etc. And it's much more than just that. There's cultural change, competence management, and they're even involved with ERP, the the personnel systems, the hiring and firing, the salary management systems, the payroll systems, the tax systems, etc. How to, the software that does that links to the government computers and so on. So there's a mixture there of IT involved in human resources as well. This area of engineering management is only a recent emergence, and when I first got into consulting in the late 80s, early 90s, I realized I had a very special niche in this. Very few people around me had this expertise. It has come on in recent years, but it's still very much a niche field. There's still not a lot of enormous amount of skill in the area of engineering, where you understand engineering practice in product development and manufacturing engineering, as well as the management consulting side of the business. It's because it is really it's management, art, science, and practice. So there's the art, meaning the business psychology skills. So one has to understand the psychology of the engineering profession, the engineering culture, in order to be able to actually make changes in there. We'll talk about that in Module 1. So there are boutique firms. Tell us about boutique firms. This is from the London Business School. It's just extraction I had. So you have internal consultants. So these are internally employees, but they're doing internal consulting. It's more incremental improvement as opposed to transformational. When you do transformational improvement, you're also involved in a great deal of politics. It's very hard to make political change when you're an internal employee. So for example, if you're 2 levels down from the chief operating officer, and the chief operating officer has to be part of the change, and he's your target, it's very hard for you to do that if you're an employee. But when you come from the outside, you're more open to be able to transform the hearts and the minds of the very senior executives. But still, internal consulting is a career. It is really all about innovation, and it can have a lot of impact, but in my opinion, nowhere near the impact that you can have from the outside. And that's where you have these small boutique companies that specialize in a very detailed, narrow field for a specific industry or for a group of industries, and we'll talk about those. And then functional and sector specialists, so fast manufactured consumer goods, Oliver Wyman, McKinsey, or corporate finance, etc. They specialize in those industries. And then there's these global full service, so they're all over the planet. So you've got companies like Deloitte, IBM, PA Consulting is a British firm, and Accenture, and so on, and KPMG. Top tiers and boutique firms. There are different stratifications, and we'll talk about those. This is some dollar figures. Booz Allen out of the United States, part of the Carlyle Group, $5 billion revenue. PRTM, which is part of PricewaterhouseCoopers. I don't have a number here, interesting. But A.T. Kearney, $1 billion, $1.1 billion. Capgemini, $11 billion, 180,000 employees out of Paris. Arthur D. Little, 1,000 plus employees out of Boston and Brussels, and so on. So from this spectrum, you have operational management to strategy, so operations, implementation, program management. And this shows you where, so in the strategy space, you have McKinsey, Bain and Company, Boston Consultant, Arthur D. Little. Accenture tends to go across these domains. In management consulting products, this is another thing. There are products, many of these products come from industry, then they find their way into universities. And many universities will take benefit from them, but it's the truth, in my opinion. The consulting industry no doubt leads the way when it comes to the knowledge development in the practice of management science. Consulting leads it, then it finds its way into universities maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years later. Universities lag the consulting industry simply because there's money to be made. It's profit. They've got to get results. They can't ponder doing research and reading, and they got to actually get results over a certain period, and that spurs innovation much more in industry. So if you're looking for true leading edge innovation, you want to be a practitioner, not an academic in the field of management science. But here are some of the products. Portfolio analysis, Henderson out of Boston Consulting Group, The 5 Forces by Michael Porter, and Michael Porter's value chain as well, but he was both a monitor consultant in Harvard. Value chain analysis, Hamel and Prahalad, out of Harvard, and Strategos Consulting, TQM, Peterson Waterman. Again, they were practitioners, but they did this through MIT. And core competencies, Rangel, Bain and Company, and BPR, Hammer and Champy out of Computer Sciences Corporation. But look, these are the names. These individuals are sort of given the credit for developing these consulting trends and bodies of knowledge, etc. But there were many other practitioners at the same time working with them. So it's not like one person or two people are. It's their trademark. It simply isn't the truth. It's not the case. There are many people practicing that didn't write books on it, but often the people that wrote the book often were told, were given the sort of the stamp. Oh, that came out of them, but often it did not. It came out of them observing others doing it, and they packaged it into a book. Economic added value, Stewart out of Stern and Stewart. Consultants are charged with introducing fashions and fads. Indeed, many of these, TQM got a bad name, nothing wrong with TQM. BPR got a bad name, nothing wrong with it. It's great practice. It's the people and how they used it and how the management adopted it and maybe fired thousands of employees incorrectly. So it's not the fads, it's not the practice themselves. This could be a project. How Web 2.0 is always changing management consulting to create the game-changing strategy. We'll talk about that. And also this concept of an ivory tower, research and recommend. So there's the ivory tower guys, we call them guys go in and sprinkle gold dust and walk out. That was never mine. I was never an ivory tower. My role was practice. I went in, helped identify the way forward, helped the executives to have a forward-looking strategy, but my real role was implementing. So you're dealing with someone here who was an implementer of change, who was retained for long-term periods, and I'm talking years at companies simultaneously. So I had Bombardier, de Havilland, Boeing, de Havilland, transition to Bombardier. I was 7 years. Messier Doughty, now Safran out of Europe, massive aerospace company. I had 7, 8 years there. Small family-owned business, Samco Machinery, 15 years, and still related to them. And Globe and Mail, 4 years. And many other businesses, long-term relationships, retainer-type relationships, but where I was actually in there making and driving the change. So the ivory tower is one model where they go in, make strategy and walk out and charge a big fee, but implementation is another ethos. So the internet creates real-time consulting paradigm. Here are 4 new rules of consulting. Prescriptive on the internet. I just want to introduce you to the Canadian Association of Management Consultants, which is itself just an association, but there are provincial institutes which certify management consultants. So these are the institutes that set the standards of practice, the exams you must take, the peer review to get your CMC and so on. So it's the sort of hallmark of consulting excellence. And many big firms, there used to be, most of the big firms all adhered to it. And I've noticed in recent years that's not the case. They have sort of declined to engage with the institutes. I'm not sure where that is at the moment, but many of the practitioners in the big firms, Deloitte and Touche, Price Waterhouse, etc., may not be CMCs. I don't think it's a good thing. I think the CMC is the most valid. One needs it, but unlike like a PEng or a medical doctor's degree or a CPA, Chartered Professional Accountant, you have to call yourself an accountant. Well, to be a practitioner in the public domain as an engineer, you have to have a PEng in Canada and in the United States, but not in Britain. So in Britain, anybody can be an engineer. Similarly, anybody can call themselves a management consultant or a consultant in Canada or America or anywhere. It isn't a licensed requirement. So the Certified Management Consulting, there's a structured program. We'll go through that. There's the experience stream, 8 years experience, and the executive stream, 10 to 15 years. And then the entry stream where you have more education to do. Like again, MBA will exempt you from many of the education. And we'll look at that in more depth. Module 2, consulting roles. Look, you're going to go from working in a cubicle on your own, doing technical work like on a computer, to when you move into consulting, you're going to be working in teams. So you cannot be in management consulting and not be involved in leading team, not just sitting with teams, leading teams and influencing teams. This is going to be one of the cornerstones of it. What distinguishes a job in the consulting from one in banking? We'll look at these things. So we'll look at what's it like to work in an investment bank versus management consulting versus industry. You work on one or two project assignments simultaneously in consulting. You work only on one product or project, typically in industry. You work on many projects simultaneously in investment banking. Higher bonuses, lower base salary. Higher base salary in consulting, lower bonuses. In industry, base salary will vary, bonuses will vary. When I started into consulting, it was much more lucrative than working in industry. So for example, my first year as an entrepreneur in management consulting, I would be making what a CEO in an aerospace company, and a pretty large one would have made. Not nowadays. Nowadays, industry salaries have gone through the roof in terms of executive pay. And to investment banking, enormous salaries are being made there. But then that itself is now under scrutiny. It's not regulated, or is it regulated properly? Some of it's regulated, some of it is not. There was a deregulation in the investment banking industry, I think, in the 1990s, mid-90s, what was called the Big Bang, and started in London. When that Big Bang meant that many banks could then sell investment products. And that caused all kinds of shenanigans, like derivatives, selling financial products without any assets underneath of them. And that whole industry is in a state of flux at the moment. So we'll look at these different industries, and again, that could become a project. There's a project for you. Consulting typology, so you've got software providers, focused on large-scale IT implementation. You have service, so operations management, human resource management, engineering management, etc. And then strategy consultants. Now, technology providers as well, they sell both the technology, the software, and the consulting. But typically, you're looking at companies where, these are strategy, these would be software companies which are providing software for strategy work. And these companies tend to focus on, down here, they provide the professional services to implement these technologies. CAD/CAM machinery, robotics technology, etc. These guys, EDS, IBM, CSE, tend to be coders, so they have knowledge of the software and the systems architecture, data warehousing. So they would tend to focus both on the technology applied, but more the software side of it. Recruitment, the best and the brightest, but not always. Not all Harvard MBAs or even business students. Yep, there's a lot of engineers have been making their way in. I've noticed recently this whole rise of the quants, people with engineering, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering degrees, and mathematics or physics degrees, who have been hired by investment bankers and so on, because they're numerate. And so they're great with equations. We're looking for engineers who can solve difficult problems. Call us on this number. It shows you an equation. They're basically looking for people that go beyond the MBA, all these mathematics types. But that's a different kind of consulting. Like those that do the quantification and the algorithms and the AI systems, artificial intelligence, that's not the change management that I'm going to be trying to teach in this course. I'm going to be trying to focus on building consultants who want to go into the higher levels of management to drive change throughout a corporation, not just come up with algorithms and so on. I'd hardly call those guys management consultants. I'd call them more management scientists. They're not magicians, preachers, or witch doctors. They are accused of it, and we'll talk about that in the ethics. They're business advisors, coaches, facilitators, interim executives. So interim, I mean, in many ways, some of my personal work in Bombardier, when it was transitioning from Boeing, was working at the chief operating officer level with individuals and maybe with the president, actually implementing the change across the entire division. And that was over a period of years. So without being an employee, and without really having the authority of hiring and firing, but having the influence as I work across these executives to get things done. So it wasn't the kind of position that you would hire a full-time person. Later years, they began to hire chief innovation officers and so on. But these kinds of positions, I knew there was a beginning and an end. It wasn't a career. I wasn't wanting a career with Lockheed, with Bombardier, with any of these companies. I had no interest in a long-term career. I was a career management consultant and with my own business, and I wanted to focus on taking that across many industry sectors. That was my career. So I wasn't going to join on a permanent basis, so I would have a contract or an interim executive contract that had a beginning and an end, and then would be renewed as it was required, and then terminated when it was required. So client contacts, typically at the senior level, chief operating officer, chief financial officer, chief technology officer, chief executive officer, or vice presidents of divisions. So these are the kind of functional services. We'll go into all that in Mod 3, or Mod 2, and specific industry sectors. I have a friend, a colleague, I maybe get him in, or get him to do a video. He specializes in pricing. Pricing's how do you price your products? And he is specialty in the oil industry. So he has I think it's BP where he has, or ExxonMobil. He's actually a relationship with ExxonMobil, specifically for pricing their products. So he flies around the world doing that just for ExxonMobil. Not a great slide, but the qualities of a consultant, you've got to have an intellectual capability. You've got to match or exceed your clients, or they're going to disrespect you. So intellectual meaning being able to have a conversation on their problems and issues and be able to conceptualize and synthesize with them. And that means from the day one, from hour one, you got to impress them. You got to have ethics and integrity. If there's any shenanigans going behind backstabbing people and so on, or any illegal behavior with the fees and the money, and it's found out, you're in trouble, and it can ruin your reputation. Emotional maturity, you're going to have people hurt you, and you will be hurt, and there's no doubt there will be backstabbers, and they'll say things about you, and you'll hear about it. And you've got to be able to handle that emotionally. It's not easy. Make no mistake, it is not easy, but you've got to be able to handle it. And we'll talk about all of this. People orientation, you've got to actually enjoy being in front of new people all the time, and inspiring and leading them. Persuasion and influence, once again, if you're not on your game and you can't persuade and influence people, you're not going to do it. Personal drive and ambition, you got to get up in the morning and feel fit. You cannot go into these companies and sit asking them what should you do. You'll be gone the next day. So what is management consulting? Just get this going here. So some consultants are externally focused, so they do competitive assessments for companies. Customer satisfaction, they do benchmarking, they do studies. These are studies. So the more external you're focused, the more you're doing studies and research. The more internal, then you're in there doing the work. This was my world really here. I was involved in this stuff, but my real pedigree was here. This would tend to be the MBAs where they're looking at the marketplace and they're doing benchmarks from companies against companies and write reports, lots of reports. This here would tend to be more the engineering types who had hardcore technical expertise that could drive business transformation and change, or total quality, or cycle time reduction, or business process improvement, etc., into companies. This question is, how does a project team work together? I'm taking some cases out of the London Business School, which is quite a famous MBA school in London, England. And we'll look at what they think of the consultants, what they actually do. We'll study this in more depth. I'm just showing you the slides. So you go through business problem, framing, the hypothesis, issue. So these are the stages. And what more actionable checklist of the competencies: problem-solving competencies, personal impact competencies, leadership competencies, drive and aspiration. This stuff you will never learn in an engineering degree. This is the stuff you learn through practice. And some people have it and some don't. Some people can't influence others. Some do. And these are the personal qualities you're going to have to explore. At least in this course, you'll get to know where you are with respect to your competencies and what you need to develop in order to enter management consulting, or indeed move into senior management positions. So there is a whole competency net framework here, which we'll get into. You've got to make sure you balance breadth with depth. If you're just a broad person, you're not likely to be hired unless you've got broad knowledge of the industry practices. So for example, you hear people say, here's Joe Bloggs, He's an aerospace consultant. Well, that typically means he's an aerospace market analyst. He probably doesn't know anything about how you design an aircraft. In fact, I know it for a fact when people are described as, here's Joe Bloggs, the healthcare specialist, he knows the government policies about healthcare, he knows how it's impacting hospitals, but he doesn't know how you do a heart operation, obviously, unless he's a doctor of it, and those connections are rare. Or he may not even know how the emergency A&E processes work, but he certainly knows the policies, etc., that are impacting healthcare and the cost issues. That tends to be breadth. But you have to balance breadth with depth. So breadth could be an industry sector, and depth could be financial management or operational management, but in a specific area. Depth of expertise, so we'll talk about those things and the skills required. Work-life balance, just to get a point here, there's no question we'll talk about the amount of hours you have to put into being a consultant. It is enormous, and you're starting out, you could be 5 days a week away from home. Let's move forward. Effective consulting client relationship. How do you find a client? We'll talk about how do you actually find it, how do you market it, how do you acquire them, how do you beat your competition? Links with, how do you, perhaps you should, what's the strategy? Should you link with a top business school? Should you get yourself involved as a guest speaker at a Harvard Business School? Was that going to give you credibility and a brand image, etc.? So how do you do it? What about publications? Do you have any books? Do you get published? Are you a public speaking at conferences? So we'll talk about those Marketing. We'll figure out from a client point of view, why would they even hire you? Do you bring special expertise? Do you bring objectivity? Is it cheaper to hire an external management consultant than to hire a permanent full-time executive with a department, perhaps? So there are types of, you could be providing advice, you could be implementing, you could be just in short-term intervention, solve a problem, help a team solve a problem. We'll talk about the kinds of roles that you can play. And then the steps in the consulting, identifying the lead. This is sales, selling, lead generation, selling the job itself. Actually, same skills as a car salesman, same skills as an IT person selling a box, computer, whatever it happens to be, software. Same skills are required in management consulting. A big difference. You don't have anything tangible. You're not holding up a physical product. You're holding up ideas. It's really much more difficult to sell services of this nature than it is to sell physical products. But the sales, you still have to learn and master the sales process. My sales training was with the Xerox system while I was at Honeywell. They put me through a whole course on selling. And that was the Xerox. It's sort of the 101 course for salespeople. Again, identifying leads. Let's say you read something in the newspaper. A guy leaves one company, becomes the CEO of another company, and he's charged with transforming the whole business in $100 billion business. And you know the individual. You ought to be marketing. Hey, look, do you need any help? If he knows that you're good, they'll hire you. Scope the job, staff it, then perform the work. You've got to staff it. Who's the right people? Who's the right chemistry? If you're managing an assignment, you've got to set all this stuff up. All right, number 4, module 4, entry, defining client needs and staffing. This is where you actually go in. You open questions, close questions. It's the consulting, it's the sales process. But you're not selling an end result. You're selling the end result, but you're not selling a tangible product. You've got to figure out who the key decision makers are. Do not waste your time on people that can't make the decisions. Many naive consultants are wasting their time with middle managers that don't have the ability to actually pay and buy the services. And you could spend hours and days and weeks and months of meeting these people and not getting to the right decision makers. You should get to the decision makers as fast as possible or shut off the communications in terms of a real job. You can keep the relationships going, but you've got to get right to the decision makers. Enticing the client, use different methods we'll talk about. Free analysis, guest speaking, corporate education, entertainment, if you're so inclined, if you're capable of that. Successful projects, statements of work, clear goals, clear end deliverables. So we'll talk about that, how to write a proposal, what should be in a proposal, why would people be compelled to hire you because of your proposal. What should be, again, we'll look at specific proposal with measurements, specific end results. These are just the stages we'll go through: identifying the lead, selling the job, scoping the job, staffing the engagement. We'll go through those details. Then diagnosing. So now you've staffed the engagement, you've got to come up with the actual diagnostics of the issues. So from your initial analysis, you've done your formal proposal, you've got a statement of work, now you execute. So we're going to talk here about data collection methods, data analysis. This concept of synthesis is very powerful. I'm going to give you insight into how I would go into companies, interview, 15 executives from 6 functional areas, or 30 executives to 6 functional areas, and how I would analyze all the input each of them give me and look for themes and color code those themes. So yellow would be business process problems, red would be strategy problems, blue would be cultural problems or leadership problems, and I'd synthesize these. As I'm speaking to them, I'm getting a sense of what the systemic problem is enterprise-wide. So synthesis itself is a skill. You can learn it, but it's also based on deep practical experience in order to synthesize it and then present it back to those executives. Performing the work, this is the day-to-day stuff where you're actually engaged with the client staff. You may be there 2 days a week, you may be there 5 days a week, you may be there 1 day a week. You may be there 3 intense days and then away for 2 weeks and another 3 intense days. You can cut it in many, many ways. And it all depends on the client availability, your availability, and what the actual job needs. And we'll talk about that, how you form steering committees and so on. Project leaders, who your key points of contact are. You've got to have the CEO's support, you've got to have the project director's support. Know that probably in the CEO's executive team, 20% don't want you there. 20% do want you. The other 60 are on the border and you've got to win them over. 20%, my experience is 20% of executives don't want the external person because of their own power play, their own issues. Chemistry's sometimes an issue, but typically it's because you threaten their power structure or they're afraid of you, afraid of their own future. So you perform the work, you do that in various phases. So first phase typically could be establish the vision, the business case and the vision, so get the team on board. Then you do detailed analysis and design the future state solution. You design it, could be IT systems, could be new processes, and then you actually implement the recommendations. This typically takes 2 months. It can be 2 weeks to 5 months. This can be 3-4 weeks to 8 months, a year. This could be 3-4 months to 5 years. It all depends on the scope and the size. So engagement, implementation, termination, very important. So you have to engage. So how do you work with the people? You have to follow an implementation process, which I just talked about a little bit, and then you have to terminate. You have to know when to stop the project, when to get out, get the results, and the assignment. So it's a life cycle, and it can repeat. This concept of repeating. You can repeat these projects over and over. They keep giving you more work. There's nothing wrong with it as long as you're adding value. They'll give you more work. You could create a very lucrative life as a management consultant with a very strong relationship with companies, as long as you keep adding value, or your business keeps adding value. We'll talk about managing client expectations and priorities. What happens when you have unwilling clients? We'll talk about that. How do you manage internal politics? What happens when priorities change? A big contract of your client gets cancelled. Oh my God. Or they get tons of work in and they're pulled from the consulting project in to do their customers' work. What happens when the company employees lose interest? They're fed up with it. They're fed up with working on improving the company and they want to get back to their day-to-day job. So then we'll look at the issues of consulting support. You want to work with your client executives. You must never have any surprises. You've got to keep them abreast of the changes. We'll talk about that. Worry, uncertainty. How do you overcome middle managers and frontline staff who are worried that they're going to lose their jobs? You've got external influences, analysts from the outside, the press, who might be writing about your intervention and or what's this consulting firm doing. If you work with a big firm and they know you're in there, you know, this company spent $25 million on this external consulting. What's the value? Right now, the big firms in Britain are under great scrutiny of the newspapers and the media in the health service sector. I think there's like £300 million or something was spent. There's more money spent on consulting there than they say than on the internal employees themselves. I mean, I'm not sure that the numbers, but it's a lot of press. How do you handle that? The work's drying up. Strategy's gone from 480 million to 411 in 2016. This is globally, these statistics. Outsourcing from 399 to 280, operations from 419. Why is this? Clients are doing the work themselves, and they're also under pressure from their employees to stop spending money externally. Increasing demand for implementation. Universities are cheaper, much cheaper to hire universities than it is these big consulting firms. The rates are completely different. But I will tell you that this doesn't always work out. They're educational and training oriented as opposed to being implementers. It's just my personal experience, having been in both camps and seen what these individuals do. So this could be a trend, but it's not often. It's a trend that probably won't stick. Universities are not in the business of professional management consulting and changing how companies work. We're going to take a break there, and I'm going to do modules 7 till 12 in the next section. Thank you very much.